we need to be very careful when we're bombarded by grief and consumed by grief that we don't just live there, because then you're training your brain to be in a perpetual place of trauma. And that's where a lot of people end up. And that's why they feel like it's impossible to recover or get any better, because they have become professional grievers. Like, they have trained their brain how to be stuck in that place.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Probate House Guy podcast. I am Brad Woodall, the Probate House Guy. And today I've got kind of a different guest, but a very relevant guest to the nature of the probate realm. Today I've got Kelli Nielsen here with me. You're in Florida, right?
I am. St. Pete, Florida.
St. Pete. I've been to St. Pete before. And she is the founder of Grace for Living After Loss and a grief counselor. And in the probate world, and if you're doing probate deals and dealing with that sort of stuff, you're dealing with people who are experiencing grief. So, Kelli, why don't you kind of introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, for sure. First of all, thanks so much for having me, and thanks for looping me into this conversation and this population, because yes, the folks that you work with are dealing with families who've experienced loss, and the help out there, the relevant practical help out there for them is few and far between. So I'm super glad to be here. And a slight correction, I'm a grief coach, which is different than a grief counselor. So maybe that's a good place to start. So a grief counselor, went to school, got their degree in psychology, and counseling for the most part really works with emotions and processing what happened in the past and processing emotions around that, where I'm a grief coach. So I am not a counselor. I don't have a degree in psychology. What qualifies me and the other people on my team is that we have all experienced personally tremendous and oftentimes traumatic grief in our lives. And we have used the tools that we teach to overcome our own grief and now help others to do the same. And so a lot of our tools, our focus, first of all, is on moving forward. It is partly processing the past, but it's more really how to move forward in a healthy and hopeful way that you enjoy living. It's learning how to live again after you've experienced loss. It's very forward and future thinking. And then the other piece is we do a lot of work around our thoughts. So we use neuroscience tools and techniques to help people train their minds how to live again after they've experienced loss.
That's awesome. Love it. Yeah. Love it. I'm all about kind of mind over matter kind of things. Like your mind is a powerful tool, and your mindset around things is a powerful tool. And then when you experience grief, like you have, and like I have, I've mentioned it before, but my son battled brain cancer and passed away earlier this year. You hope no one ever has to lose a child, right? But I did, and I've had to learn to cope with all of that and process all of that. And that's kind of how I found you. I found your YouTube channel and all of that. And now I'm bringing you to my audience. And then my wife and I are also going to help you with some of your content and just paying it forward, right? Giving back and helping the people that are going through the tough times. So that's really what it's all about, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's 100% why I do what I do, because when I had my traumas happen in my life, I looked for help and I could not find helpful help. I found support, which is different, right? And I found people to describe for me grief and describe for me the pain. But what I was looking for was, how do I get out of this? Like, what are the do's and don'ts? What is the quickest path to healing and recovery? Because for anyone who's lost someone significant, and a child especially, like, it's not a place you want to linger or hang out or stay. And for me, I didn't want to go see a counselor. For me, I was like, unless you have faced this beast that I'm facing, I don't care what you have to say. Right, wrong, or indifferent. Like, I don't care what your books have to say. I don't care what the theories are. Like, for me, it was intensely personal. And I really wanted to connect with and learn from someone who had been in my shoes or very close to being in my shoes, so that they could speak from a place of knowing. And so I now created and do what I wish I would have had. It was very much born out of my own necessity and just seeing kind of a lack in the marketplace for it.
That's awesome. Yeah, yeah. So let's lead into the first major topic, right? What is grief? What is it? Everyone kind of has heard the term before, but what's the definition of grief?
Yeah. So grief, for me, well, and even like a biblical definition of grief is that it's an affliction or an illness. Like grief is a condition that you experience when you lose someone you love, and it is resolved by the process of mourning. So when you first have grief, when you first experience loss, like grief afflicts you. You have this severe pain from the loss. But then what we need to do is engage in a process of mourning, which is kind of resolving the loss, moving through all the implications emotionally, intellectually, whatever. You do an active process of mourning, and that can and will eliminate the grief, right? And I'm so glad you even asked that question, because there's so many myths and misconceptions and straight up lies that are permeating our culture and our society. This idea that grief never ends and you just learn to live with it, or you grow around your grief, or grief equals love, or as long as you love, you'll grieve. Those are all very dangerous beliefs, and unfortunately, they're very prevalent in our culture. It's why people struggle so long for grief, because they've come into agreement with all these different mindsets. So if listeners can hear, like, grief is not meant to be something that you carry forever. Grief is an acute pain that is meant to be resolved by the process of mourning. And if you are still feeling the pain of grief years after the loss of your loved one, that's a sign that there's still some processing to do. You need to get some help so that you can resolve that.
And everyone, I learned this through our grief journey that we've very much still in the midst of, right? That everyone processes it differently. It rears itself in different ways for different people and for different amounts of time. And so why don't you kind of touch on kind of maybe some of the different ways that grief can present itself in, emotions and that sort of thing.
Yeah. I just want to address what you just said, because it is true, but that also, when we say, well, grief is so personal and the timeline is different for everyone and it shows up different for everyone, those are true statements. But what that is doing is making the solution ambiguous. Like when we say, oh, grief is just this like intangible, incalculable, it affects everyone differently and it lasts different for, like, what you're doing is making the solution harder to grasp.
Okay.
Because the same could be said about weight loss. Everybody's weight loss journey is so personal and everybody's different and it's going to respond to food differently. Those are all true statements.
Yep.
But also there are some guiding principles and best practices that just about anybody can adopt in order to lose weight.
Yep. Absolutely.
So the same thing applies to grief recovery. Yes, it's personal. Yes, it affects people differently. Yes, the timeline is going to be different. But there are some guiding principles and things that you can do that is going to make your grieving time more efficient and make your healing process be accelerated. And so I just always see how quick we are to just describe it that way. Like our culture has so set the definition and tone of grief exactly as you just described it. And that's kind of part of the problem. We need to be able to say, okay, it is personal for me, but here are the things that I can do to mitigate or to move through it and all that kind of stuff. And I'm sorry, I totally rabbit trailed off of your original question. I think your question was, how does it show up for people? Was that the question?
Yeah. How does it present itself? No, but that's great. I love that explanation. I love that kind of, giving examples of relating it to other things. That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, so grief and how it presents itself even looks different depending on how far along, you are in the process. So really, the first year especially, there's kind of some traditional stages and paths that most people find themselves in. Again, you may be the exception or whatever, but people initially, there's shock and numbness that really lasts, usually in my experience, the first up to 3 months. You're really in kind of varying levels of disbelief and shock, and the reality of it sort of sinks in like layer by layer over that first 3 months. And then for most people, the 3 to 6 month mark is a lot of times the hardest place for people because the shock has wore off and they're now attempting to re-engage with their life or learn how to live in this new space, and they find that they are ill-equipped to do it. Like they're like, 3 to 6 months, okay, now I have to figure out how to move forward, and I have no idea what that looks like. I have no idea how to do that. And for a lot of people, they're exhausted, they're mentally, overwhelmed. They just don't feel like they have what it takes to even move forward in a meaningful way. And then the 6-month to 12-month for most people, and that's usually an ideal time for me and my group, we usually, the 3 to 6 month mark is a perfect time for us to find someone, because then the 6 to 12 months is learning how to do life again, teaching your brain how to think. Another big piece, the 6 month to 1 year mark, is relationships. Relationships change dramatically. And that's a very universal experience of most people, because you change by going through grief and loss. And the people around you also may be grieving, and just navigating those relational changes. I mean, not to mention grief and death make people uncomfortable. So if you have a loss and you have friends, your existence now makes them uncomfortable on a certain, especially if you're a parent who's lost a child. Like, we are every other parent's biggest fear. Yep. And so some people are better equipped to reconcile that or discuss that. And some people, their solution to that is to just avoid you, because you're dealing with something that they don't want to have to imagine ever happening to them. And the fact that you're doing it makes them uncomfortable. And so it's just easier for them to avoid you. And so dealing with all of those relational changes and challenges is a whole nother component of especially walking through that first year.
Sure. It's funny you mentioned that. After my son passed away, the school sent out an email to kind of say, hey, one of our students has passed away or whatever. And in our local elementary school, Facebook group, when they made this announcement, they didn't mention who it was, right? They said one of our students, they didn't mention who it was. And one of the parents kind of wrote this kind of semi-nasty post, but I can see where she was coming from. And it was, she's like, how am I supposed to tell my kid about this? How am I supposed to talk to my kid about, someone dying, and what do I do? And da-da-da-da-da. And it was kind of but I could tell it was angry, but it was more of she didn't know what to do. Yeah. And that was the way she processed that. And my wife stepped in and said, hey, that was our son. Here's some things that you can tell your child or whatever, and blah, blah, blah. And then the lady responded, and she was like, I'm so sorry about my tone in that post. I didn't mean to come across that way. Thank you so much for helping me with this. This is great, the way that you've kind of given me tools to help position that and tell my child, why your child has passed away and that sort of thing. And that people process it differently. In her case, it just reared its head as anger, right?
Yeah.
She didn't mean it to be anger. That's just how it kind of came out. And it wasn't her child that died. It was our child that died.
Right.
But she didn't know how to explain that to her child. So she was kind of, what do I do here? And so many people, when we went through it, were like, I don't know what to say. And it's like, you don't need to say anything at all. It's okay. Just be there. Let's go have lunch or something. You don't have to say anything at all. So,
yeah, I think it's the most personal thing to all of us, right? And it's actually the only thing on the planet that we all have in common. We will all die one day, all of us, right? But everybody, it's so fascinating to me being in this work. We all walk around as if none of us are going to die. We all live in this little fairy tale that we aren't going to die and our loved ones aren't going to die. We're all just going to live forever until it happens, right? So, But the people who are in the before it happens space, it's deeply uncomfortable. It pokes them in a very private place to even contemplate or think about or be confronted with death. So yes, I'm horrified at things that I said to other people before experiencing it for myself. These ignorant things that came out of my mouth before I was in this seat, so those of us that are in this place, we just have to have a lot of grace and patience for those that don't know. You don't know until you know. And then unfortunately, to your point, like we end up being the educators and the helpers. Like I remember when my son passed away, I wrote an email to everyone. I was working at a nonprofit organization, and I wrote an email to everyone letting them know, like, hey, you can talk to me about my son. Like, you know, it doesn't have to be taboo or whatever, but if I don't feel up to talking about him one day, like, please respect that. Like, I kind of had to coach them on how to just take the elephant out of the room and to help them not feel uncomfortable or weird about talking about it. And that is a personal thing too. Some people want to go back to work and they don't want to talk about it. For them, the work is a little safe haven where they get to pretend for 8 hours that they're not going through the hardest thing in their life. And then other people do want to talk about it. So that's part of the work I do, both with clients and companies, is to help facilitate that conversation. You as the person who's been through loss, like take the lead and let people know what you need and what would be helpful for you. And or if you're a manager or you have employees, like ask those questions or even create a questionnaire so that when you have employees go through that, you have a formatted way to find out from them, how can you best support them as they walk through this?
So that's a great suggestion there. Maybe there's something, and maybe you can kind of do this offline and send it, maybe a few tips of some of these guides or packets or whatever, maybe for my audience, for these are real estate agents, real estate investors, that sort of stuff, who are obviously dealing with the real estate aspect of an estate. Someone has passed away, and part of this business and doing what we do, you have to be a people person, and you have to learn how to be empathetic with them and care about them as a person, but also keep the transaction in line. So maybe there's some tips maybe we'll do this offline or something. If you've got maybe like a top 3, like, oh, here's how you can talk to them about this or help them with this or something, that would be kind of cool.
Yeah, I'd be happy to put something together, but like just off the top of my head, the biggest thing is to simplify as much as possible. I think people underestimate or don't understand the cognitive disruption that happens when you go through grief. There's actually a title for it. It's called grief brain. So when people are grieving, they're not thinking as clearly. They literally don't have the capacity to think as clearly as they would pre-grief, right? The analogy I use is like an engine getting flooded. Your brain gets flooded with all of these overwhelming emotions and conflicting ideas and thoughts. And so your brain just sort of shuts down to a certain, and so people are forgetful. They have a hard time finding their words. They have decision fatigue because they've had to make so many decisions, and their brain is also trying to compute and reconcile that this very significant figure in their life is no longer there. So their brain is trying to compute mathematics that no longer work, if that makes sense. So if you're interacting with somebody who's grieving, the more simple you can make it, the more of the heavy lifting. And now obviously you can't make decisions for people.
Correct.
But if you can clearly lay out and make it very plain, like this is what this looks like, and this is what this looks like, and just give them this, or even make the decision for them and let them know, like, hey, if you do this, here's what it's going to be, will be tremendously helpful for them. And be patient when they're forgetful or flaky or whatever else. They're not trying to blow you off or be disrespectful. They just honestly don't have the attention span or mental capacity to retain lots of information and details.
That's awesome. And you know what? That made me think. You mentioned the 3 to 6 month time frame. I was recently doing sort of a deep dive analysis into my own probate data over the last week. I kind of do this periodically, and it got me thinking. And I was looking at it, and the vast majority of the people that sell us their property call us more than 90 days after the date of the death. Many times it's like 70% of them call us 90 days or more, and it was like 45% call us 180 days or more after the date of the death to sell the property, because in those first few months they're processing things, and it's just chaotic, and they're grieving, and maybe they don't even, maybe they bury their head in the sand in terms of going to file probate and all that stuff until later. Their brain just can't handle it at the time. And like literally that's real life data that I just kind of analyzed in my own, I've got, I mean, gosh, how many, been doing this since 2018. So it's a lot of data, right? Tens of thousands of rows of data. And that was the overwhelming statistic there, that's how long it took them to actually call us.
That sounds about right, and another, depending on when they call in, or actually whenever they call in, another great tip would be to ask if they have an advocate or somebody that's helping them, or encourage them to find somebody to help them that's a little bit more removed emotionally, but that can help them to process information. I have a grief survival guide, our top 10 tools for navigating grief. And that's the first thing. I call it a grief buddy, but
okay,
someone a little more removed emotionally so that their intellectual capacity isn't so diminished, that can field information, process information, and someone that they trust that can then, make those simple choices, A or B or whatever, but to do the heavy lifting of digesting the information would be really helpful. So that might be another tip for your folks, to ask if they have a person like that, or if they can get a person like that to just help them make this decision and process through.
That's a great idea. And there's a sales saying, which is a confused mind says no, right? And in this case, when you're dealing with both a sales situation and the fact that someone passed away and they have grief brain, you have to make things as simple as possible for them. Like you said, you have to present, and we do that a lot of times. We'll say, Mr. or Mrs. Seller, like, we think that this is the best solution for you, because they might call us and say, hey, we want to sell me, buy my property cash or whatever. And I'll look at the property and I'll look at the stuff and I'll say, we think actually I'll be happy to buy it cash, but I think you're leaving some money on the table. I think you'd be better off listing it with an agent and doing X, Y, and Z, and we'll help you do X, Y, and Z to get it ready for sale. Or we might say, I know you think that you might want to go that route, but like, given the circumstances, in our experience, this would probably be the best solution for you, but you got to make the decision on your own. So
yeah. And I think you guys need to remember the emotional cost of extra work related to the house. And especially depending on, I work with clients who lose a loved one to suicide, and it happens in the house, and so sometimes the fastest path to being able to offload that property is the best thing for them, even if they're leaving money on the table, because it's about their mental health and well-being and taking positive steps to move towards a new season or whatever. So I love that your heart is for the client and you're trying to show them all kinds of options. I just want to say a little word of, we don't know always the emotional weight of them carrying the house and going through a traditional sale process or whatever. Some people, it may truly be in their best interest to just find the fastest solution possible.
Definitely. And I've mentioned this on other videos I've done, but I would say 9 out of every 10 properties that we buy from estates, they sell it to us full of stuff. They take out what they want from the house, their keepsakes and that sort of thing, and they leave all the rest behind. And I mean, that's 9 out of every 10 estate properties we buy. We're buying it. We're doing some sort of pretty major junk removal, getting rid of a lot of stuff because the stuff in the house is just one more thing they have to deal with in the mountain of everything they have to deal with.
Yeah, and that's such a huge thing. Like, that makes my head and muscles hurt, even in like a healthy emotional place, to like, moving is so stressful, even when you're excited about it and you're whatever. So like, having to go through all that stuff and find places or dispose of it or whatever can be such a burden to people. So yeah, absolutely.
Definitely. And you mentioned earlier about a grief journey, right? Like, and how you mentioned there can be an end, or does it end? So can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, 100%. So, and this again is kind of controversial. A lot of people will say, oh, I'll never be healed from grief. And so I'm here to say it's been, so I lost my mom to suicide, and then a year later I lost my son to a drug overdose. So that was my initiation into this grief world and arena. And that was like 6-7 years ago. My mom passed in 2017. My son passed in 2018. So here I am 6 years out from the passing of my son. And I'm here to tell you that I am healed. I am healed of the grief and pain of his passing. I do miss him, and people always say that, well, I'll always miss him. I do miss him, but my missing him a lot of times is in joy and laughter. I think about little inside jokes. I have ways that I stay connected to him and reminded of him, and I smile and remember his presence in my life and his continued presence in my life. I think that's another thing too. I think a lot of people mistakenly think the only way they can stay connected to their loved one is through sorrow and being sad. But that's part of the mindset shift we help people make, is there's a lot of ways that you can stay connected to, remember, celebrate, and include your loved one in your life going forward. And they don't have to involve sadness. I mean, just for total transparency, the last kind of sad day that I had was his birthday a year ago. So Quentin's birthday is October 21st. And for whatever reason, last year on his birthday, my heart was just heavier, more than it normally is.
Sure.
But the rest of the time, like, I think of him with fondness and with light and laughter and all these things. And I am not distracted by or debilitated by grief, and that's what's available to people. And that's it. What I would say is, like, healing isn't instant and it isn't easy, but it is possible and it is worth it. So it's going to take time, and it's going to take intentional, consistent action and doing the right types of things, but you absolutely can get to a place where you're healed and whole.
Awesome. That's great. So can you give me some examples of like maybe a positive coping mechanism, or I don't know if coping mechanism is the right word, but a positive way to process grief compared to like maybe some destructive ways to process grief, and how someone can kind of recognize a pattern and change the pattern, right?
Oh, there's so many. Let me pick back.
No.
Well, okay. The destructive thing I want to talk about is being mindful of your thoughts in the people that you're around. So unfortunately, the majority of support groups, I'm going to say 90% of support groups are keeping people stuck. Each week you show up and you're rehashing your story, and other people are rehashing their story, and you're all comforted because you have that in common and you bond over the pain of it. And then you stay discussing and enduring and surviving the pain. What you've done is actually programmed yourself to stay stuck. Now you have friends that you're stuck with, so you don't feel alone, but the mindset that you unknowingly probably adopted is that it's going to be hard for the rest of your life, and here's these other people, and you can figure out how to have it be hard together. So you want to be aware. If you go to a support group and there's no one there walking and healing, if you go to a support group and it's just meant to be never ending, there's no program or process you're walking through, you just keep going indefinitely. Like, those are all red flag signs that that's not a place where you're going to find healing. So be cognizant of the places you seek to get help, right?
Yeah.
And even in your own mind, when I work with folks, if you find yourself being overwhelmed and or wallowing, you want to put a time limit on that. We're not talking about suppressing or minimizing your feelings or ignoring your feelings, but your feelings are not in charge. You're in charge of your feelings, and learning how to even just limit that from a neurological standpoint does a lot of good things. So when I work with folks, if you're having a sad moment or day or whatever, okay, feel your feeling, have a good cry, but then set a timer on your phone for 5, 10, or 15 minutes. Don't allow it to go longer than 15 minutes. Give yourself time to have a good boo-hoo. And then when that alarm goes off, make a commitment to do something else. Get up and go for a walk, call a friend, turn on a TV show. I kind of don't care what you do, but the key, how you're training your brain, is that it's okay to feel these feelings, but we're not going to live here. And we're going to feel it and express it, but then we're going to go do something else. You're creating a new neurological path in your brain that teaches you to take action, to not just sit in the feelings. It's okay to have the feeling, but then after that, you're going to take action. And that is a very, very powerful ingredient and skill for your mind to adopt, to not get consumed by the heavy, wallowing, sorrow kind of place.
That is a great tip. And you know what's funny is I mentioned this in a video I did, like, I think last year. Did you ever watch the show Shrinking on Apple TV with Harrison Ford and
yeah, I just did a couple months ago, actually. Yeah.
There was one segment where he talks about, and obviously this is a comedy show, but they're therapists, right? And the background is he says, set a timer on your phone for 15 minutes, go in the car or go in the closet or whatever, and cry as hard as you can and feel all the feelings that you can. And then when the 15-minute timer is up, go back to doing whatever. Like just set that timer on your phone and feel all the feelings, right? Just get in depth in it and, you know, all that. And then after 15 minutes, and they did that in that show. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Awesome. Yeah. I don't remember seeing that part of that or that episode or whatever, but no, and from a neurological standpoint, if everybody can just kind of understand that our brains are like supercomputers, that it's always looking for patterns. It's always establishing paths. It's always creating neural pathways. What you think about and how long you think about it and the words you say are constant information that are creating new paths, which actually they know now changes your brain landscape. Like your brain today is different than it was a year ago, entirely because of the thoughts you thought and the words and the actions that you took. So we need to be very careful when we're bombarded by grief and consumed by grief that we don't just live there, because then you're training your brain to be in a perpetual place of trauma. And that's where a lot of people end up. And that's why they feel like it's impossible to recover or get any better, because they have become professional grievers. Like they have trained their brain how to be stuck in that place.
That's a great point there. So that's a good example of kind of recognizing the destructive mechanisms. And then maybe what about some maybe another positive thing people can do? You got the timer. Can you think of another sort of positive way they can process things?
Yeah. So what I always tell people where to start, the most beneficial thing that you can do is to create for yourself some grounding statements. Take some time to think about how you want to move forward, what you want your life to look like a year from now, 3 years from now, whatever it is, and design some statements that you're going to meditate on, that you're going to read out loud, this is literally instructing your brain, letting it know where you want to go. And then you'll be amazed that your brain will find the paths and the resources to help you get where you want to go. So when I'm working with clients, I always want them to start, their first sentence should be something along the lines of, this is a season, not a sentence. I will learn to be happy again. Every day I am getting healthier, more healthy and whole, or every day I'm one step closer to being reunited with my loved one. Like something to let you know that this isn't permanent. This isn't forever. You are and will recover and get better and feel better. And so if you can send that message to your mind, you're going to find that you feel lighter and you will start to feel better. And then when we're working with folks, we usually help them construct like 4 to 6 sentences that really kind of solidify for them what they're wanting their recovery journey to look like and help accelerate on the path. Like, so for example, when my son passed away, my sentences were, my son is not gone. He's just not here. I will see him again one day and we'll have all of eternity to spend together. And literally that was my anchor. Those were my marching instructions. That was my response to other people who would say ignorant things. Like that became the thing that I stood upon. And that actually was the thing that helped me to see how powerful this all was, because once I was saying that long enough, grief would show up and my mouth would just say that without me thinking about it. Like it was an involuntary response and my body would just calm down. The grief would leave. So that's what's available to people. So the sooner you start doing that, the better. And it takes 63 days, FYI. It takes 21 days to implant a new thought, to create a new loop. But it takes 63 days for that thing to become automatic. So the good news to all your listeners, and if they're grieving, you can start today saying something, meditating on it, and 63 days from now, it will become part of your programming. It will become the filter that you relay information through. And that's a really, really powerful tool.
Yes. And I mean, that applies to so many things, even beyond, dealing with grief. I mean, we talk about it in one of the groups I'm in. I'm in a sort of a dad mastermind group, become a better dad, become a better husband, business owner, that sort of thing. And it's like, okay, we're acting as if, and we've created some statements of this is who I am. And but also at the same time, don't create statements that I am not, because when you focus on your brain will focus on the not stuff, and it's like reverse psychology. So
right.
I am this, or I will do this, or that sort of thing. And if you just continue to repeat those, it works. It's powerful. It's a real thing. Some people are like, oh, that's hokey, fairy stuff. It's like, no, it's legit, like real. This is like program.
It is real. And when I'm helping people create sentences, I always like them to be present tense and active words. So like, instead of saying I will heal someday, I would say I am in the process of healing, or every day I'm more healed. Because if you say I will heal someday, well, when is someday? Yeah. Someday could be 3 weeks from now or 30 years from now. If you don't give your brain the actual, think of it as a computer, and you have to give it very literal instructions. That's how you have to phrase it. But yeah, it's so powerful. And these skills and these tools, if you learn them because you're grieving, to your point, my life is unrecognizable from before the losses because I have learned these things and adopted these things and applied these things to every area of my life. So like, I always tell people when you're grieving, like, you didn't ask for this situation, but if you will learn these things because of this situation, these things you learn will serve you well the rest of your life, even on the other side of grief. And you can design a life that you never thought possible, or that you actually enjoy living, and that's what's available to everybody.
That's awesome. Love it. So now I like your standpoint because you're being a grief coach, you're giving people like practical tools, which therapists give people tools too, right? That's not to say that they don't, but you're giving them like real practical tools from your school of hard knocks that you went through, right? What you've learned because you've been through it, which is a unique perspective on things. I like how you mentioned, I don't want to talk to a therapist because they haven't been through what I've been through. And that's a true statement, right? Like they have. And now professionally, they've kind of studied this in school, right? And they have other clients that they do that with. But what if somebody can't, because therapists are expensive, what if somebody can't afford professional therapy? Like, do you have some kind of resources or obviously I know you have a YouTube channel and you have a lot of free content on your YouTube channel. Are there any good, kind of free resources for someone because you need to deal with it, right? You can't just bury it, right? You have to deal with it, whether you do that professionally and pay someone to help you, or you seek resources. Do you have, recommendations on some resources they could utilize?
Yeah, for sure. And that actually is an agreement I made with God when I kind of was tasked with this assignment. I made a commitment to him that anybody that would cross my path would be left without excuse, that we will give every resource and tool to learn how to use these skills to recover from grief so that people can be walking in the fullness of healing. So yes, we do have a YouTube channel, and I think there's like 100 and some videos. So you can watch so many videos. We have a free Facebook group where we go in there sometimes, and it's a community of people who are learning these things together. But also I'm a big book reader. I'm always reading books. I'm always researching more. And I do have some, so that's, very low cost. Even like, my book, You're Not Crazy, You're Grieving. The first half of the book is my story, but the second half of the book is literally written out the 5-stage process that we walk people through for healing. And if you're a reader and you can apply the stuff yourself and hold yourself accountable, there's everything you need in that book to recover, right? And there are other good books out there. I think just become a student of grief. And my thing is like, keep looking until you find the tool, the teacher, or the community that's right for you, and then keep working it until it works. Like when you find the thing that resonates with you, that makes sense to you, practice and practice and practice until you figure it out and you find the healing and freedom that is available for you. And then we do have a monthly membership because I know like I'm a coach, right? And we work with clients one-on-one, and we do small group coaching, which is a little bit higher investment. And I know not everybody's in the place to do that. So we created a monthly membership, kind of a la carte, sort of do it yourself thing. So you get access to a lot of videos and worksheets. And then we just have a weekly group call for all the people in the membership. So it's not one-on-one, but it's the same powerful information. And there is a weekly call that you can hop on and get real-time instruction from one of our coaches or whatever. And so for me, and that ranges from $25 a month to $97 a month, depending on what level of support you want. And that was kind of my solution to being able to make this accessible to anyone that wants to learn, how to do it and how to apply it.
And that's still less than, even at your highest, right? That's still less than what it would cost you to go to a therapist per session. I mean, it's $100 and some a session nowadays.
Yeah, and even your copay. Yeah, like our $97 version of the membership, which I probably should increase it, honestly, but whatever, because the $97 version, you get the weekly calls with everybody, but then you actually get 2 one-on-one calls, 30-minute calls with one of our coaches. So if you're stuck, if you're confused, if you're having just a bad day, you have access to 2 30-minute calls one-on-one with a coach per month, which is crazy. Yeah, like even copays with traditional counseling would be more expensive than that. So yeah.
Sure. Yeah. And now that you mentioned, I mean, yeah, I was thinking about it. I did some counseling. Our journey was a little unique in the death of our son, in that, he had gotten a diagnosis with brain cancer, and it was a terminal diagnosis. We knew he was going to pass away. So like a lot of my processing happened before he passed away, and went through counseling before he passed away, and did that for a number of months. And I mean, yeah, I was paying, $150 a month or something like that. And, I could process it under insurance, I think, but I think we just paid out of pocket for it. And we put our kids in counseling too, to our oldest son to go through that. And, so we're paying a lot of money in counseling. So for what you're talking about, that sounds like a great value for providing, helpful tools to these people that need it. So.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing for me. Like, it's recovery. It's not support, it's recovery. And there's difference, right? And so I always say I'm like a physical therapist for people who are grieving. Like, I'm here to teach you to re-engage those muscles and teach you how to do the exercises that are going to get you back to a place of strength. And that's what's needed at some point, right? Like, we need support when it first happens, but at some point we need to transition from support to recovery. And that's what we do. So
that's awesome. I love it. So if someone is not directly affected by the death, but they're dealing with a grieving person, like we are, right? Like a real estate investor, or even a friend, what are like 3 helpful tips that you could give to them to help kind of deal with that, or help them deal with that? We talked about it earlier, but
yeah, and I think you already said one of them. I guess if I could tell people, like, don't feel obligated to say anything, because if you say something, you're most likely responding from your own. What most people do is they think, how would I feel if this happened to me? And then they say to the person what they would want to hear. And that is a mistake. That's sympathy, not empathy.
Yes.
Right. So sympathy is when we project our own feelings about a situation on top of somebody. And empathy is genuinely, truly being curious and trying to understand their experience and support them in their experience. So like, so many people would come up to me and say, "Oh, Kelli, I don't know how you get out of bed." They thought they were saying something kind, but it's like, that actually wasn't a helpful statement, And then if enough people say them, pretty soon I'm like, yeah, why do I get out of bed? Like, I should just be sad and in bed all day. So my point is, don't feel the need to say the right thing. There's nothing that, even if you say the right thing, it's not going to fix it for the person, right? So like, and please, please, please avoid the cliches like, well, they're in heaven and this and that. Like, just less is more when it comes to, and like Brad said, just your presence, just being there and physically being there and making consistent, intentional times to show up and be in their presence and not feel obligated to speak or try to fix it or whatever, but to just be there, to walk through this with them, whatever this looks like. Go grab lunch, go for a walk, like be a presence that's around them and is okay with however heavy or hard it is for your friend or your loved one. Like, let that be okay. That's theirs to carry and eventually figure out how to navigate. It's not your job to fix it, but if you can just be there with them, I think that's the best gift you can give anybody.
Definitely. Or just, like go out to lunch and you don't even have to talk about it at all. Right.
Yeah.
Sometimes people like, us going through, maybe there are days I just don't even want to talk about it. I just want to go like hang out and like have a good time or whatever and try to be normal again. And it's okay to not mention it at all. And you're not going to offend anyone by not mentioning it. Like just be a friend like you were before. Yeah. But also, we went through this, right? You can't have because it changes you, right? You can't have an expectation that this other person is going to be the same person that they were before.
Right.
They're going to be different for sure.
And just make room for whatever that looks like. I know my sister and I have had to figure out and navigate, she has 2 kids and they're, slightly younger than Quentin or whatever. And so as they graduated and got married and now they're starting to have kids and, she would want to share those things with me, but she would feel guilty sharing with me milestones in her kids' lives because correctly, it is a little bittersweet for me. But to be able to have open dialogue to say, like, I can be so happy for you and so happy for your circumstance, and I can have a moment of bittersweet around it because I'll never get to see Quentin get married or have kids or whatever. Making room for the honest dialogue of both sides of the experience is going to help you to stay connected and keep your like intimacy and everything with your close friends and close family. Like I remember my sister saying she felt bad complaining to me about her kids. Like if her kid did something or whatever, she would be like, oh, I can't believe. And then she's like, well, who am I to complain? Quentin died. And it's like, no, like you get to have the fullness of your experience and it's valid. And mine is also valid. So let's just make room for both people to be honest about what it means for them. And we can have fullness of joy and we can make room for sorrow when it shows up as well. And one doesn't have to threaten the other.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Yeah.
Absolutely. Love it. That's so awesome. You have any other thoughts or tips that might be helpful to our audience in terms of, helping with someone?
Yeah. I mean, again, just going back to making it super simple, please don't say like, if you need anything, I'm here, that does nothing. That's like the polite thing to say, but it does no effectual good because first of all, they don't know what they need. And second of all, if they did know what they need, they're not going to call you and ask for it because they don't have the mental capacity. So much better. I would rather people do something, make a gesture and do something for the person. And maybe they accept it and maybe they don't, but like bring a meal, like have food delivered or show up and say, hey, let's go to the park or let's go to the movie, like make the decision for them, take action. And worst case scenario, if you show up and say, hey, let's go to a movie and they just really honestly can't, then whatever. But the less decision making you can put on the person, the more action you can take to physically show up and be there and to take anything off their plate, mow their lawn, clean their house. Like life still goes on and the people who are grieving are ill-equipped to deal with life. So any of the life things that you can take care of for them, great. Like if you're dealing with real estate and whatever else, like, yeah, like if they have to stage their house or clean their house or do stuff take care of those details for them.
We offered to send the landscaper over like, hey, do you want me to send my landscaper over and mow, like have them mow the grass or whatever?
Yeah.
We'd be happy to do that. Or, we can do this for you. We can do that for you. Cause yeah, you're right. The if you need anything, let me know is kind of an empty sort of thing that they're never going to call you about that. But if you can offer something of help, and I'll share this personally, one of the most helpful things that people did for us in the last year or so was giving us Uber Eats, Grubhub, and DoorDash gift cards.
Yep.
Because people want to cook you food, and we got so much food from people, and some people I'm just like, A, we were throwing food away because we had so much food, right? Yeah. And B, some people aren't as good of a cook as you think they are, and I'm like, oh, this was.
Then you feel obligated to eat it, and
a little spice or something. It's pretty bland, But then it was like, if the Grubhub gift card or whatever is like, because I don't have the mental capacity to like cook. I don't want to cook. And I also don't know what I want tonight. So I can go on Grubhub or whatever and say, hey, there were nights where I would order something for myself. I would order something from a completely different restaurant for my wife, and my son would get something from we would have 3 different Grubhub orders coming to our house because the 3 of us couldn't, think of one thing to get, and we didn't know what we wanted, and we just ordered what we wanted. There would be like, my wife's like, well, I want pizza tonight. I was like, well, I want barbecue, so I'm going to order barbecue. And that was awesome because I could just order it and it was delivered to my door and I didn't have to go anywhere and I didn't have to think about like cooking or all that stuff. And I knew within an hour I would have food and I would have food that I wanted to eat that night. Yeah. That was so helpful, like in our experience.
I love that. I don't think it was around when I went through my losses. I wish I would have had that because, yeah, even if you guys had the clarity of like, oh, this sounds good, or I actually want to eat this, the ability to get what you want, right? And not because, like you said, having the forethought to like, what do I want to eat and go to the grocery store and buy the things and then the energy to make it and actually eat it. Like in the beginning, I literally had written on a note card, like, eat today. Because like,
right.
My brain was not, and that was part of my grief buddy would like check in and be like, did you eat today? And so your brain really is that super. So yes, I love that. Like making it easy that when you remember to eat that you can just push some buttons and what relatively sounds good to you will show up at your door. That's great.
Yeah, that is a very new technology just in the last few years, right? So yeah, you're right. You went through it 6 or 7 years ago. That wasn't really a thing, but it is now. And it was probably one of the most helpful things was like, hey, I'll just order dinner tonight and it gets delivered to my door and I can have whatever I want. And, and then I'll just sit here and, get a little fat for a couple months. And then I had to hit the gym afterward. That was another thing too, was afterwards getting back to the gym regularly and getting back to a sense of normalcy and creating a schedule in my life was like super helpful too. So,
yeah, that's usually a tip I give people straight out the gate is like, the more structure you can put back in your life, the better, the sooner, the better. Your sleep is probably screwed up. Again, your brain is the flooded engine. And so, and our brains thrive on structure and predictability. So as much as you can, wake up at the same time every day, go to bed at the same time every night, create a little morning routine and nighttime routine. And if you can eat at the same times every day, like all of those things are building blocks to help calm down neurologically what's going on in your mind and help reintroduce stability. So those are like really foundational starting points for folks too.
Awesome. Well, hey, Kelli, we're kind of running out of time today. You have created so much value for the audience today. I really, really appreciate all the tips you provided. If people want to get a hold of you, how is the best way for them to reach you?
Well, everywhere on social media, it's Grace for Living After Loss. So if you want to follow us on YouTube, if you want to find me on Facebook, we have our group and all that kind of stuff. And the website is graceforlivingafterloss.com. And if anyone wants to reach out to me personally, I would love to hear from folks. Kelli, Kelli, at graceforlivingafterloss.com.
Awesome. Well, hey, Kelli, thanks again for coming on today. I really appreciate all of your time and all the great value that provided to our audience. And they've got, if they want to get a hold of you, they know how to get a hold of you. Maybe we'll do some more content together in the future and create more helpful tips for the audience. Guys, thanks for joining in another episode of the show today. Like I mentioned on some of the other episodes, if you're a real estate agent, a real estate investor, and you are trying to get in the probate niche, already in the probate niche, and you are interested in having someone run your marketing for you with expertise that has lots of experience, that's what we offer. Go to probatehouseguy.com and you can follow the links there and sign up for that if you're interested in those services. So thanks again for watching and listening to the Probate House Guy podcast. Have a great day. Bye-bye.